Good afternoon, friends. I'm Mark Skorka, President of Opera America, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our April webinar. I'm still working remotely from my home in Vermont, where I'm on the shared hunting territory of the Western Abenaki and Mohican tribes. It's a time when the arrival of spring, increased availability of vaccines, and plans for performances across the country give us a sense of optimism and excitement. Although opera's been open for business in ways that never could have been imagined, we'll be more open in the weeks and months ahead. But let's reflect for a moment. We just passed the one-year mark of the COVID pandemic. Over 500,000 lives have been lost in this country, and nearly 1 in 10 Americans has suffered from COVID. In the same year, we've been galvanized to fight for racial justice in light of the murder of fellow citizens like Breonna Taylor last March and George Floyd in May. More recently, we've been appalled by the violence against our Asian friends and colleagues. We in the arts, who are dedicated to enriching our communities by elevating human creativity, must stand up for human rights. I don't see it as a political choice, but as a moral responsibility. At the same time, the COVID crisis has given us an opportunity to create a stronger community, locally and nationally, thanks to Zoom. It's also enabled us to discover new layers of art making, from exquisite film projects to outdoor performances in tents, amphitheaters, and drive-in movie theaters. Artists and producers have found ways to liberate their voices to express themselves during the pandemic. Along the way, many of the barriers to experiencing opera have been overcome, at least temporarily. Barriers of day and time, location, length, price, and formality. Today, we have a wonderful group of panelists who will reflect on what they've discovered over the last year and what elements of this learning they want to continue into the future. Our panelists are Angela Brown, wonderful soprano and creator of opera from a Sistah's point of view, also the founder of Morning Brown Incorporated. Mark Williams is the Chief Artistic Officer of the Cleveland Orchestra, and you'll see he has some opera posters behind him in his office. Arthur White is the Director of External Affairs at Michigan Opera Theater. Martin Miller is the Executive Director and Producer at TheatreSquared in Fayetteville, Arkansas. He's been there since 2009. And Keith Wolfe-Hughes, who's the General Director of Opera Birmingham. The discussion will be led by Lisa Swain. Lisa is the Senior Director of Operations and Member Advisor for the Advisory Board for the Arts. Before then, for 7 years, she was the Chief of Staff at Houston Grand Opera, and we're happy to keep her in the opera fold. So thank you one and all for being with us today. Thank you for those who are participating as our panelists. I'll come back from time to time with questions for the panel that we observe in the chat, and then again at the end. But in the meantime, over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me today. I would like to just extend a very warm welcome to everyone joining the webinar today. It is an honor and a privilege to be facilitating this discussion today. As Mark shared, I work for Advisory Board for the Arts, and we are a research and consulting firm that is all about bringing a completely new approach to identifying and implementing breakthrough ideas for the arts. And so this discussion today is right up my alley, and I'm excited to get started. We're going to start today by inviting each of our panelists to come on screen and respond to the following prompt to get us started, and that is, what are the most valuable innovations you've discovered in bringing opera or performances to audience in the last year? And how will these innovations change your practice next season and beyond? And so with that, I would like to invite Angela Brown to join us and to share her thoughts on this prompt.
Hi, I'm glad to be with you all today. You know, Lisa, I am very excited about what will happen. What has happened has been amazing. I was actually prepared for this opportunity and didn't know I was. Opera from a Sistah's Point of View is a show that I created, back in the late 90s, but didn't get its start until 2001 because I knew there was going to be a time where I would want to employ myself, maybe. So in doing Opera from a Sistah's Point of View, having the opportunity to have it videoed for virtual viewing through Birmingham Opera and Cincinnati Opera, and then partnering with Kappa and Classical Music Indie, I have found that being able just to galvanize all these respective artist organizations has helped to move the little engine that could, Opera from a Sistah's Point of View, into a bigger mainstream. Who knew that a pandemic could do such wonders? So I look forward to having more input during this webinar.
Thank you, Angela. And we are excited to dive a little bit deeper into how this production and these collaborations really came about. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I would now like to invite Mark Williams, the Chief Artistic Officer at the Cleveland Orchestra, to join us and share his response.
Good afternoon. It's a really great pleasure for me to be here. As Mark mentioned, I do have opera posters behind me here in my office in Severance Hall, and they're always here. They were not put up just today for this important webinar. I'm very much looking forward to a robust discussion on performing arts during COVID. In the past year, the Cleveland Orchestra created and launched a custom OTT platform called Adela. Adela, named after Adela Prentice Hughes, the founder and truly the godmother of the Cleveland Orchestra from 103 years ago. Adela, the platform, has become truly a home during the pandemic for new performances of the orchestra, for archival content, some of which has never been seen publicly, for solo performances of our musicians and guest artists, and for educational and community programming. On the surface, Adela provided an opportunity to stay connected with our core patrons during the pandemic. But below that, and more perhaps, it's provided an opportunity to deepen our impact and deepen the way that we reach audiences. You know, there's been an uneasy relationship between technology and orchestras. For example, cell phones and iPads in the concert hall. And maybe there's good reason for that. The temporal nature and the in-the-momentness of what we do versus the attention dividing and potentially isolating nature of technology. But nevertheless, this is a moment to embrace technology and to use it to amplify and support our work. Over the past year, Adela has changed our perspective on access, not only for underserved communities here in Cleveland, but members of the larger Cleveland Orchestra family that we meet on tour around the world, or in Miami, where we have an annual residency. It's been an avenue for artistic expression from different program types like concerts and recitals or musical films to repertoire that we would not have had the opportunity to play and present in the concert hall, for education for both adults and children. And it's been a great opportunity for us to experiment with the length and format of programs. And it's promoted storytelling, not just our story, the Cleveland Orchestra story, but the story of the music and the musicians who make it. And if I might, orchestras are not the very best at storytelling. So this is something that's really moved us forward. And finally, the platform has allowed us an opportunity to be responsive to our community and to the world around us. So in summary, audiences are hungry for this, and digital will not go back into the box. This will become an expectation of audiences. So we are thinking as we move forward that this will be a new stage for the Cleveland Orchestra. I'm looking forward to speaking with you more about this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to explore it yet, the Adela platform is truly beautiful and well put together, easy to use. I would encourage you to check it out even while you're exploring this webinar. And now I'm thrilled to welcome Arthur White joining us from Michigan Opera Theater. And Arthur, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, for moderating this discussion. I want to also thank Mark Skorka and the entire staff at Opera America. Because of your leadership, advocacy, and friendship, you have helped to make the difficult days of the last year a little less difficult for our opera community here in North America. March 12th, 2020 will always be burned in my memory. We were in a rehearsal hall at the Detroit Opera House, and I watched Denise Graves and Arthur Woodley, God rest his soul, rehearse Terence Blanchard's opera Champion, which was due to go up in just a few days. MOT's CEO Wayne Brown appears in the hall and announced operations were to cease due to this pandemic. Our chorus, orchestra, staff, patrons, we were all devastated. As director of external affairs, 99% of my time was spent out in the community spreading the good news of opera and MOT, on the hunt for new patrons, donors, and board members. Now I had no idea what to do next. And with no in-person performances, I was told to go virtual, young man. And that is what we did. We launched MOT at home. We began to record our young artists from their homes singing arias, spirituals, jazz standards, and music from the Broadway stage, captured all on their cell phones, as well as incorporating members of the orchestra as accompaniment. And within 6 months, we had produced over 100 presentations from vocal works, opera lectures, pre-opera talks. These were talks before the Met's nightly stream, dance dialogues, podcasts, conversation interviews with operatic stars, past and present. All this to engage our patrons during this downtime. Now, previously, the marketing department solely handled all of our social media accounts. But before I knew it, we all became proficient at live streaming, producing, directing, and editing our own content. Now, some of our community partners saw what we were doing, and they needed content for their offerings. So we began to provide content to the Detroit Public Schools, libraries, performing arts venues, museums, hospitals, book clubs, women's groups, and this all now provided us with necessary income during this very lean period. Now, by the time we reached the summer months, I was able to call on our partners at the city of Detroit, who allowed us to bring live performances to the many public parks of Detroit. And in accordance with the CDC and state guidelines from the governor's office, we brought music to our community in a socially distanced and responsible way. Now, MOT lost its artistic director and visionary, Dr. David DiChiara, after 45 years at the helm. And so we have been on the hunt for the person who would lead us artistically into our second 50 years. Director and producer Yuval Sharon postponed his year-long sabbatical and came to Detroit in the midst of this pandemic. And he has been a breath of fresh air for the company and the city. He mounted a version of Wagner's opera Götterdämmerung. He titled it Twilight Gods, incorporating and celebrating the best of Detroit in a production produced and performed in our open-air opera parking center. And he won the buy-in from the Brunhilde of our days, Christine Gerke, who has just been named recently Associate Artistic Director. So I look forward to talking more in the Q&A about more things that we did, but that's sort of a glimpse.
Thank you, Arthur. There are so many exciting things happening in Michigan right now, and I'm really excited to dive in a little bit deeper on some of these community performances and the success of Twilight Gods. I would now love to welcome Mr. Martin Miller, executive producer or executive director and producer at TheatreSquared. Martin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks, Mark and Opera America. It's really lovely to be part of this conversation. I love any opportunity to kind of cross-pollinate and think about what our different fields are doing in one motion. I remember in Denver, actually, not maybe it was a decade ago now, when all of these different performing arts field came together for one huge conference, and it was total madness, but really interesting. And I'm feeling some of that vibe today. I really like it. Yeah, speaking of madness, this year was was completely insane. I know I'm not exactly saying something unique there, but we, it's hard to describe, and I don't really have to, because so many people on this conversation have had the same experience of what it was like those months last spring, feeling the need to respond, not knowing how long it would last, first redoing our performance schedules for a couple months later, and then 6 months, and then maybe a year, or who even knows. So I will say some of the first surprises I had, beyond all those unpleasant ones, but maybe better surprises, were the responses to our first forays into a digital version of what we were doing. We had a wonderful series we kicked off basically immediately to replace our in-person education programs, and that was lovely, and we kept hearing from students and teachers. But when we first got back to the theater, under at that point a SAG-AFTRA contract, to film a play in August, and started streaming that out to our patrons, after the first preview, what would have been the first preview, the night when those ticketed patrons watched it, I called all of them, every single person who was on that performance list, just to ask what it was like for them. And one woman I reached said, I've been coming, I volunteer and I subscribe, I'm your favorite patron. But my husband hasn't been able to come for years. He's got mobility issues. He's basically been housebound. And so I'm always telling him about this amazing show I just saw. And he just got to be back in your audience for the first time in years. And I remembered thinking in that moment, like, oh, like that's not something replaced. That's something gained. There's something to this about access and equity that we hadn't been thinking of when we were just racing to get a digital ticket back in the hand of our subscribers. So that was interesting, because it was one of the first hints that we needed to be thinking not only about how we get back on our feet, but who is our audience and who should they be? And have we been reaching everybody we should? We also thought a lot about how we work, as we kept reinventing our process. We created so many schedules. It was probably, exhausted all the letters, and then did the Greek letters, and then they were just nonsense names after that. But in doing so, we came to realize that our process wasn't probably so sacred as we thought it was. We've filmed and streamed 10 projects since the start of this. 5 of them were over Zoom, and 5 of them were fully produced and filmed at the theater. But it was one of those Zoom pieces that got the most press and most excitement, a piece called Russian Troll Farm, a workplace comedy, which ended up on the New York Times Best Theater of 2020 list. And that was not part of our announced programming for the season. That was something that came to us as an opportunity. We said, well, why not? It's not like we have to build a set. Let's go ahead and produce this. Let's hire some design, whatever that looks like, on Zoom, and let's make this work. And I think that's also made us think about, how do we make space for those kinds of urgent, of the moment, dexterously produced pieces among our longer lead time productions that we've planned for years and that run for months. How can we do that all the time? So yeah, excited to talk more about that. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Martin. And last but certainly not least, I would love to welcome Keith Wolfe-Hughes, who is joining us from Opera Birmingham today. And Keith, please share with us your response.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to Opera America for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the traditional lands of the Coshati-speaking Muskogee and Creek people here in Birmingham, Alabama. As everyone has talked about, Birmingham, and like everyone, we did have to suspend operations in the middle of a production when the pandemic began, but in many ways we have been more active in our community than ever before. This year, we've held outdoor pop-up concerts, hosted virtual masterclasses with students around the state of Alabama, and created digital concerts for our patrons to watch online. We will reach just as many, if not more, patrons during this dark season than we would during our typical season of 2 concerts and 2 productions each year. I struggled a bit when thinking about my opening statement and the term valuable innovations, since for me, the word innovation implies something new, and these days, usually something that is digital or computer-based. And while we did create in some digital content, which has been very successful, for us, innovation has been just as much about returning to our roots as a community-based organization, drawing on the talents of the artists who call Birmingham home. I do have a couple of takeaways, learning points from this year that we are discussing how we work into our future plans. Number one, by moving our performances literally out into the community, we have formed relationships with nearly a dozen different schools, venues, and community groups, all of whom are excited to continue doing work with us in the future. How do we adapt what we do as we move ahead to grow those relationships? Isn't that a part of the community footprint conversation we've been having for the last couple of years? Number two, we also invested in our local community of artists who have been involved in everything we have done this season. As we look at continuing some of the new ideas and projects we started this year, those artists here in Birmingham will be a vital part of that programming. Number three, we have been a part of a couple of industry collaborations, and we've seen many more companies working together, not just to create a co-production where they share sets and costumes, but collaboratively creating content that is then shared amongst the member companies. With productions returning to the theater, how might companies, especially smaller regional companies like Opera Birmingham, work together to create shared productions rather than creating every show on our own? For me, this is especially important as we continue the conversation on how do we continue to have digital content as part of our season, which is important, but that's a financial hurdle for a small organization while we are also working to do live performances. And finally, how can we reimagine the inherited grand opera canon to create experiences that continue to welcome the new audiences we are finding and nurture the existing audiences who have stayed with us, without resurrecting the barriers of high price points and elitism of the old way of doing things? Works such as The Tragedy of Carmen, or the adaptation we're doing this weekend of The Pirates of Penzance, or the amazingly cool Rosino project we learned about at the New Works Forum last week, show me that the power and joy of seeing these performances isn't just about the grandiosity of a 3-truck show. We can take the best parts of these works and create a new experience for both longtime opera fans as well as those discovering us for the first time. So I look forward to being a part of this conversation, and thank you again for having me today.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you to all of our panelists for those wonderful introductions. I will invite everyone to join me again so we can dive into our discussion today. And for our guests this afternoon, I will share that we'll spend a few moments just diving a little bit deeper into some of these innovations that were shared, but really we'll spend the majority of our conversation today focusing on the strategies and the key learnings that we can all take away from these experimentations and innovations, and look at how these organizations are going to be leveraging these experiences to their greatest abilities in a post-COVID world. We will save a few moments at the end for Q&A, and as Mark Skorka shared at the beginning, he may pop on to highlight some questions as they come up. So we do invite you to share any questions that you have in the chat throughout the discussion today, and we will certainly get to as many of those as we can. So to get started, I would love to come back to you, Mark, and talking a little bit about Adela. We spoke earlier, and we're talking about how having this OTT platform, and for those of you who might not be familiar with the term, OTT is an over-the-top service like Netflix, right? It's like a platform in and of itself for sharing virtual content. And we talked about how this is just a great tool for experimentation on all sorts of different fronts, whether it's with content or packaging. And I would love to have you share a little bit more about what you are thinking in terms of how you'll use this as a tool for experimentation.
That's a huge topic, so I will try to be concise. I think it's important to state openly that, you know, the pandemic started in March, and we didn't just, pull this idea out of nowhere. We had been thinking for a long time that we needed to increase our digital platform. We are a global organization in a very small market. We tour a lot. We tour to Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and we have sort of fans all over the world. And we were thinking a lot about how do we connect with those patrons, those fans in a more regular way, and how do we also increase support for the organization? As I mentioned earlier, we have a residency in Miami as well, and while we spend 2 to 4 weeks there a season, again, these are folks that we consider part of our family, and so how could we be with them more? The pandemic accelerated this process, and I would say that what we have created has been wonderful for this moment, but there's certainly much more to do and much greater ways to use that platform. So at this moment, we're really thinking through, what is the strategy going forward? As a platform, it's useful for so many things. For example, I was thinking the other day that there are some really basic concert programming principles that don't work on digital and vice versa. A 5 or 6 piece program in a concert hall is a terrible idea. Invariably, it feels endless and it feels bitty, and it sort of breaks up the dramatic arc of a program. Whereas I think it comes to life in a digital space where people are, first of all, there's a level of comfort because you're in your own space, but you sort of can use I suppose you could say, the magic of television to create, to keep this arc of intensity, for example. So it's been an interesting process for us learning how to program for a completely different medium and to work through how it can help us reach these different audiences.
Yeah, that's great. I love that the way that Adela is set up, you really are looking at creating an experience for the audience and ways that you can connect with them more deeply, but then experimenting with different kinds of programming. We're excited to see where it goes from here.
Well, I think it gives us an opportunity to bring dramaturgy into the concert in a way that we typically can't. Again, back to that concert flow, having someone walk out on stage and explain to you what they think about the piece and how the history of the piece and how it makes them feel can make a concert feel rather stilted and didactic. But then suddenly on video, it's just you, the audience member, and this person, and they can tell you an intimate and personal story. I'll give you an example. We played Rodion Shchedrin's ballet on after Carmen's after Bizet's Carmen, and we tracked him down. He lives in Cyprus now, and we have a member of the artistic department who speaks Russian, and so he interviewed him in Russian and did all of the translations himself. But here we are seeing Rodion Shchedrin talk about, first of all, the enormity of adapting Bizet's great opera, but telling us about writing this piece for his wife, who was the prima ballerina at the Bolshoi, and how he was speaking about having poured out all of his feelings for his wife into this piece to put Carmen on his wife. I mean, it takes my breath away just to think about it. And that's an experience that we could never bring to our audience here in Cleveland. And interviewing him and putting it in the program book would certainly be moving, but this is personal. These are the ways that these kinds of services can move us forward.
That's great. And in talking about storytelling, I would love to actually circle back to Angela. You touched on, Angela, this production, Opera from a Sistah's Point of View, and that it was not born out of COVID. This is a production that you created a number of years ago, but now has gone through this incredible transformation of moving to a digital space and now preparing to bring it back in live productions again, first in Birmingham and then in Cincinnati. So I would love for you to just share a little bit more about what the creative process has been like, and if there are things about the program itself that you've adapted to fit the digital format, or that you've learned from the digital format that you're going to carry forward in future iterations of this production?
Well, Opera from a Sister's point of view, as I said before, was a show that came about clearly for me as necessity, because I'm an opera singer and my bread and butter is being on that stage. And if I'm not on that stage, the lights, the mortgage does not, life doesn't move on. So I said to myself, I wanted to create something where I can put myself on whenever the opera companies weren't checking for a sister. Okay. So in the beginning, it was totally a selfish thing. Okay. And I did do this show whenever I was in conjunction, like doing an opera somewhere. So I would be part of their educational outreach. Well, as the pandemic came, and like I said, I had done this show for a number of years. The pandemic happened, and I had always had an idea that I wanted to do opera from a sister's point of view, Generation Next. I wanted to be able to take some of the light that I have been able to garner and shine it on the next generation of young, talented Black opera singers. So Opera Birmingham and Cincinnati Opera actually gave us the opportunity. This was something I was preaching for years before, but no one bit until the pandemic. And that's okay, because I had the opportunity. I was prepared in the face. And then I had the opportunity to present the show. So with Birmingham and Cincinnati, we actually went to Cincinnati and we did a concert of Opera from a Sister's Point of View, Generation Next, with 4 very talented singers. It was Reginald Smith Jr., Brianna Hunter was the mezzo. I'm getting ready to mess up now.
I'll help you. Jemez McCorkle was the tenor, and Victoria Okafor was the soprano.
Yes, thank you, honey, because I was getting ready to totally mess that up. But it turned into a situation, an opportunity that I don't think any of us knew was going to be as successful as it was. I kind of thought it would if it had an opportunity to go, but having the power, the might of Cincinnati Opera and Birmingham Opera behind you, it helped it to move along. And it has been able to go into people's homes where they can sit and watch and see that there are opera singers out there that look like them. Now, I'm talking surely of a Black thing, because I used to think that only Black people had a problem with opera until I started doing opera from a sister's point of view. Then I found out that white people don't like opera either. And so I have been on the mission of diversity and opening up the genre to where it's just entertainment, people. And if you look at the stories that we're talking about, they're human stories. And they're the stories that you would see in a movie, but it's just being sung to you beautifully on the stages of the world. So I'm hoping that Opera from a Sister's Point of View will continue not only to be a live offering, but continue in the digital world, because this is something that can be packaged and sent out. And actually what we're offering is, I did with Indianapolis Opera, another iteration of Opera from a Sister's Point of View that was a one-woman show as the original. And I would watch the video with whatever organization that wanted to pay to see the video and their constituency. And we would sit and have a live virtual question and answer session after they watched the video, which was, virtual or had been pre-recorded. And that has been exciting and successful. So, I think if we just continue to use our brains and throw whatever creative ideas that you may have at the wall and see what sticks. I mean, The world is our oyster right now, if you want to think about it, because it used to be said, well, when a door closes, a window opens. Well, baby, what if the whole house is gone? Okay, that's where we're at right now. The house is gone. So you know what we got to do? We've got to build it so they will come.
I love it. I love that you are leading the way in putting yourself out there, creating new content. It's so exciting. And I'd be curious, Keith, to hear from you about whether it's through this experience or you talked about really taking advantage of local talent. Has this time really have you explored new partnerships? Are you thinking about the possibilities for collaboration in a new way through some of these projects?
Definitely, and especially with Angela's program and working with Cincinnati Opera, the way this came about, we were thinking of doing opera from a Sistah's point of view as part of our season. Our production wouldn't have happened until January, and so we weren't sure, at that point, would artists be able to travel? Could we do something in person? And so in talking with Angela, we're thinking, well, what if we pre-recorded it? What if we did a virtual version? And that's when we discovered Cincinnati was planning the same thing. So why should we both create something completely separate when we could work together to create this? So Cincinnati was planning to do this. I think it was recorded in September. We worked with Cincinnati to license the content. We worked with and importantly, worked with each of the artists to license them and pay them for the work that we would be showing. So rather than recreating the wheel here, we had something that we could collaborate on, share expenses, and still make sure everyone was being taken care of. So as we think forward, and whether that's in a digital environment or that's live and in person, where are those opportunities to work together to create something? I won't name names because we're still sort of in the early stages of doing this, but talking with some of our regional companies that are here within a couple of hours of us, of if we are going to create a project that could be rehearsed here, we've collaborated on who the artists are, who the collaborative team is, what the resources are, that rehearses here and performs here, and then the next weekend goes to another city. And it's kind of like a touring model. I mean, it is a tour that we're able to employ the artist for longer periods of time. It's quite an investment of resources and time for a company like Opera Birmingham to create a production that only is performed twice, whereas the economy of scale of doing it with multiple organizations. And then I mentioned in my opening, in order for us to continue creating digital content, which I think is important because we've reached so many more people than we would have reached if we were just doing things in Birmingham, we're going to have to work with other organizations. We don't have the resources, excuse me, or the staff to create a wide range of digital content and create in-person content. So where are those opportunities to work together to create something that multiple organizations are coming together to create, and then it is shared amongst those organizations rather than doing it all by ourselves?
Absolutely. And we'll definitely come back to that audience component. One thing that I'd like to really shift towards looking at the future. What have we learned? How can we implement these learnings? And I would like to come to you, Arthur. Many of our panelists today have talked about how this past year has been an opportunity to get out into the community or share the work that they're doing with new audiences. And I know MOT has really done a lot of this work, and I don't think we said this before, but Twilight Gods is now going to Chicago. It's already totally sold out in Chicago. What an amazing experience. But I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how your experience in getting out into the community this past year and experimenting with things like this drive-through opera has informed your season next year, which I know if you're not, I'll let you share, but it's broken into these two acts. So how have you taken the learnings from this year to inform your planning for next season?
Certainly, for those who just aren't familiar, Yuval Sharon, he came on, had this idea. We had to do things outside, of course. Obviously, doing indoor performing in the Opera House, as gorgeous as our house is, was not possible. And so he thought, we have our own parking structure, which is open. Why don't we do a production there? And I remember thinking, wow, how's that going to work? But it was beautifully done because people were able to come stay safe, within their own vehicle, with their own bubble of family and friends, and enjoy this, Götterdämmerung, God, Twilight God, sort of his version of it, which incorporated so much of our community, our poets. Of course, we a big Ford Mustang, which was the Grana, which takes Brunhilde off in a blaze of glory at the end of it. So really connecting. Yuval has really reminded us that our community needs to be reflected on the stage or whatever it is we are doing. So 14, we had members coming from different 14 states came to Detroit to see this production. Raised over $500,000 to put this effort on. People were really excited about this effort. And so it means that we are continuing. We're going to continue. We've always been aware that we had to do things in the community. I've been doing things in the community. I think I mentioned in my few minutes talking. I spent all my time in the community. We knew that that's important, but it's wonderful to be able to take a production. And so, right, for the rest of the season, we're opening up Rusticana in just exactly 5 weeks from today. It's already sold out, as a matter of fact. That's at an open theater, amphitheater, Meadowbrook. And then we're going to move around to some other. So I think the idea, because we still can't be indoors safely and responsibly, so the first half of our season is going to be at amphitheaters around the city, which is wonderful. It gives us another wonderful opportunity to reconnect with those communities. We try to do it, but you got to just keep doing it. And so that's why we saw 50% of the people who came to Twilight had never stepped through our doors before. So it's a great opportunity for us to really reconnect. I think that's how we'll also know how success at the end of all of this, how well did we do going in and reaching into these communities that we just haven't maybe spent as much time or been able to spend as much time in. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions.
It's incredible to hear. I was not aware of that data point of 50% of your attendees never having participated or attended something at MOT before. And I'm curious if we can take it a step further. Are there concrete strategies that you're really putting into work now to target those individuals or those households who experienced opera for the first time? And can you give us an example of what that looks like?
Sure. First of all, everything that we do, even if I do a virtual performance, we are constantly sending out surveys. We're constantly getting people's feedback, what they thought, what they liked, what they didn't like. No, once we get you, we hang on to you. And so we definitely stay in contact with all those folks. But as I said, yeah, we're going to continue to do more things in the community. I think we will going forward, there will always be a production, at least one production. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. There will always at least be one production that will not be in the Opera House moving forward. It will be somewhere, at least 1 or 2 productions that will be in the community. This is very important, and I think we've learned that from this time with this pandemic.
That's awesome.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
I think it was Keith who mentioned partnerships. We were always very good about that. I think it has paid dividends. I think I told you we were able to sort of use, sort of provide content to some of our partners, which helped, feed some of our work financially. But also today, for example, we are going to do, as I mentioned, Rusticana in 5 weeks. Well, we have chorus and orchestra. Because of our partnerships with the city, they came to the opera. I was almost late today. They came to the Opera House and vaccinated our chorus and orchestra. I mean, this is so that we can be ready for this performance, so people can feel comfortable to come and perform and work together and collaborate. So it's partnerships. I am just, I can't speak enough. That has really been a cornerstone of what we've been trying to do and have been doing.
One hand washes the other.
Exactly.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Martin, I have not forgotten about you. I would love to circle back to you to talk a little bit about the filming that you're doing. So you filmed some educational projects, but you're also going to be doing synchronous filming, I understand, of live performances. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that experience. Many opera companies in the past year have filmed productions without an audience, which is a totally different kind of process and beast from then filming when you have an audience in place. And can you share a little bit about what we can look forward to from TheatreSquared?
Absolutely. Although, we're just learning every day. I will say, up to this point, all of our filmed projects that we built sets for, we, did the whole process for as if there were going to be an audience, and then we filmed them without an audience, which is such a strange experience. Although it's strange how 9 design team members can sound like an audience when they're in the room and reacting. We did those on SAG-AFTRA contracts, and then eventually on Actors Equity Association contracts. And our next project is the first one, which we will actually have a limited distance live audience for in the theater itself, which is not a step we took casually, or I should say are taking casually. We had the benefit of just having opened our new facility in August of 2019. And one of the things we didn't really think about as we were designing a space that was completely acoustically isolated and thus had ridiculous HVAC systems was how useful that would be in a pandemic. I never thought, even in the design process, we never talked about how many air changes per hour or what level of MERV filtration or all of these, outside air supply. These were not things we concerned ourselves with as we were designing the new facility. But boy, have they become important now. As we talk to Actors Equity Association, as we talk with our infectious disease specialist, the venue that we will be opening up first for simultaneous in-person and live streaming performance actually has 11 air changes per hour and 40% outside air supply. It's a level that actually far exceeds what most experts are saying you should look for. And we're also obviously spacing people apart and requiring PPE and all of these measures, on top of the fact that many of our audience members are happily now fully vaccinated and more on the way. So the last week of April, we'll be coming back with this show, a world premiere, a piece called At the Wedding. And really interested to see how that feels. We'll film for the first week of performances with 4 cameras and bring those takes together for what we offer on demand to patrons who are not yet coming to the theater. It's stunning though, because we read survey after survey saying, from this arts consulting group to this arts consulting group saying nobody's ready to come back, nor will they be for a long time. But when we actually went to our patrons and said, okay, we're doing the show, more than 70% of them said, we'll be there. So that's actually the first survey response that's really meant something to us, is people telling us where they're going to be using their tickets. But why would we stop streaming? Even once those 30% who say they're going to stay at home for now decide to come to the theater, we've had 15,000 new ticket buyers who don't even live in our community this year. Why not stream to them? I think our issue with that in the long term is going to be more about agreements with unions, with publishers, and other groups to make sure that we have the permission and license to be able to do that in the way we want, rather than will an audience be interested? I think they will.
It's incredible to hear. Again, I love hearing these numbers of new audiences that people are uncovering and through these digital efforts. And I'll pause here too, because you touched on the complication of unions and licensing. And I know adjacent to that is this question of how do we operationalize these strategies, right? We've developed new competencies within our teams, but how can we maintain that or build upon that as we shift into producing real live performances while doing maintaining digital efforts or other efforts. So is this something that TheatreSquared has thought about, whether from a staffing perspective or how you're managing it as you launch into your first synchronous live stream experience?
We didn't want to have to, it was a very hard decision whether to furlough or lay people off. Many companies have done so, and most for very good, necessary reasons. We did not. And one thing that we did do, however, was quickly turn to people who hadn't previously been camera directors or editors or, infectious, taken courses in how to enforce, cooperation with safety protocols and said, hey, this is the new thing you're going to be learning to do. So they moved perhaps quicker than anyone expected from other job titles to these job titles, and we're able to do so. But what that means is, as we shift back into this hybrid model, is that we have all this expertise in-house. We have people who are now have produced 5 shows where they can cut between these different cameras, where they can make sure that our, the backend live stream is performing as it should. So we're not really putting a layer on top of what we normally do to continue to do that. We're just capitalizing on these new skill sets that we've built in-house. So I think that we can continue it, even though it's hard to know what the revenue future looks like for streaming. That said, we're in Arkansas. The fact that we had reviews this year from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, that's not normal. They don't usually fly out to see our shows. They may be national newspapers, but they still live not in Arkansas. So the visibility and the sort of brand awareness that our show's streaming has brought us is probably equivalent to what we would consider a revenue stream. It helps us locally. It helps us with artists. It helps us when we can't get an agent on the phone. These things all add up.
Yeah, that's great. Arthur, I see you over there smiling and concurring. I'm wondering if you can share any examples from your team about ways that you've developed your staff and how you're leveraging that moving into next season.
No, I think Martin is exactly correct. Yes, many hats had to be worn over the last year, but no, it's been great. I think we have learned a lot. I think, and for us, we were talking about sort of that transition into digital. It's clear from our partners, they are saying they are going to want digital from this time going forward. So we have to we're going to have to work that into what that is going to mean budget-wise, what it's going to mean resources-wise, but that is going to be a reality. And maybe in some ways that might be easier. I've been, as I said, 99% of my time was taking singers out around, dragging them everywhere around the state. And maybe it means I won't have to do that. And maybe I could probably get some things done in the same way I would the end result, maybe without having to do that. So trying to maybe work a little smarter using this using the virtual platform. So yeah, I think there are some people who definitely, they want only live in person, but that's not everyone. And I think that won't necessarily be the case for every situation. It'll be us to figure out what that situation will be. And obviously working closely with our partners that will help us identify what that is or when that is.
Absolutely. And Martin, you spoke to not being a revenue stream yet, but I think to Arthur's point, there's a way that we can look at minimizing expenses, like expanding our reach while at the same time doing it in a cost-effective way through some of the strategies that we've explored and developed over the course of the past year. I'd love to come back to this audience question and talking about how we have helped some audiences to overcome barriers to coming into the performance halls, into our opera houses over the course of the past year. And looking forward, how are we taking active steps now to ensure that we're not recreating these barriers? And I'm wondering if we can start with Mark and then maybe move to Keith in talking about whether it's through exploring the question of programming or looking at actually the audiences that we're targeting. How are you thinking about barriers and how to make it an easier experience for audiences in the future?
I think one piece which sort of connects to the topic we were just speaking about is not thinking of digital as necessarily a pillar. I think digital is horizontal, it's not vertical. Because I think when you look around the institution, I think a lot of what we're talking about is artistic. It's what you put on stage. But if you think about education, if you think about your philanthropy and advancement, you look at your financial services, there's a way that scaling up on digital can help all of those areas. So one of the things we're thinking a lot about is How do we build in digital into every step of the process to engage our patrons, from how they buy their ticket to what information they get between ticket buying to coming to the concert? How do we prepare them for the concert? How does digital support that particular to performance? And then how do we increase the tail of engagement after? And so that's, you could talk about that for our core classical product, but you could also look at that in terms of education and whatnot. I think that digital provides us an opportunity to, greatly increase access. And I was thinking the other day about our education offering. We bring children into the concert hall to see special concerts with the Cleveland Orchestra. But of course, every year when we survey the teachers, some of the same themes come up every year. They want these shows that introduce the instruments of the orchestra and actually give really basic information about what an orchestra is. And of course, they need that to be able to better understand what happens in the hall. But we don't have an opportunity to see those kids, 21 weeks a year, like we might see a full subscriber. So digital gives us an opportunity to create products that we can push out to the schools that really helps raise the bar, so that we can actually talk about much more complicated matters in the hall. We want to be talking about, diverse composers and how we bring young people into the music creation process. But I felt really stymied by, we have to do, well, this is a violin and this is a bow. And so this gives us an opportunity to get all of that stuff out of the way and actually create opportunities to regularly be in touch with young people before they get here. So instead of maybe they hear the Cleveland Orchestra once a year, it could be 10 times. And you can create this content that's evergreen, so that year after year, a new crop of kids can see this, and we can just really raise the level.
Great. And Keith, I'd love to hear what you're thinking in terms of, how you're going to ensure that your audiences, when they're coming back, aren't facing these barriers.
We've been having a lot of conversations. A couple of things we've talked about, because we've always known we have some really wonderful artists here in Birmingham, but this last year we've really been working a lot with them. And plus, if we were to expand within a couple of hours, we have Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta, Mobile, Huntsville. I mean, there are a lot of areas where we could draw singers, draw artists. We would love to do more in our community. We have talked for years about an education program, whether that's in the schools or family-friendly performances that are done throughout the year. We now have a wide range of artists where we can put something together, and we've changed in our mindset that we don't have to try to get that done with a week of rehearsal and then do the show. We've been rehearsing this Pirates of Penzance for 3 weeks, or almost 3 months. All local artists rehearsing a couple of days a week. We can start working over the summer to get a project together that we can do in the wonderful parks we have here around Birmingham, and then also take advantage of the fact that we can perform outdoors for a vastly long period of time before we hit the winter. The other conversation we're having, we were fortunate, sort of outside of this specific conversation, in the fall to be a part of a cohort that was reviewing some planning materials that were developed by the Wallace Foundation. Opera America brought a couple of organizations together to review these, and a lot of our conversation focused around, as a smaller organization, as a level 4 regional opera company, does it make sense for us to continue producing these 3-hour big productions that require big orchestras, that require all of these resources? Or as we start opening up, do we reimagine what those works are, still pull in all of the pieces, I keep going back to the Tragedy of Carmen that we did a couple of years ago. It has all of the music that everyone loves. It is the same story, but it's told in a much more compact manner that, for me and for many of the audiences that we heard from, almost made it like a wild roller coaster ride. You start that show and you go 90 minutes nonstop, and at the end of the show, in this particular show, at the end of the show, everyone's dead. This idea of taking the Twilight of the Gods, of taking all of these pieces and stripping them down. We did Tosca the season before the pandemic. Tosca is a big show, but at its heart, it's only about 3 people. How can we reimagine these shows? Traviata, the same thing. It's about 3 people. We don't want to lose the chorus who has been with us year after year and, you know, provides that resource. So how we wouldn't want to strip all of that away, but how can we reimagine those works, and then in the reimagining create something that we don't have to charge $90 a ticket, because we're not spending $200,000 to do a production. We can take that $200,000 and do 3 or 4 reimagined productions and just have a greater impact in our community.
Yes.
I love that. And I love just that spirit of continued experimentation, because I think that's so important. And I think that's something that prior to COVID, so many organizations felt that any kind of experimenting was just a huge risk, right? Like, what if our audiences don't come? What if it upsets our subscribers or our donors? But this has been a time when people really can try different things at relatively low risk. I know there's never no risk, but an opportunity to experiment. And I'm excited to see an organization that's still thinking about carrying that spirit forward. I'm getting some questions related to this transition into becoming really production houses, right? And looking especially to Martin and Mark and all of the filming that you've done and you're planning to do. And is there anything that you can offer in terms of, I suppose, something that's worked really well for you and something where each of your organizations is still experimenting and growing related to doing live performance while also capturing that for a digital audience? Mark, would you like to offer some words of advice? And
Sure. I would say the biggest challenge that we're facing, I mean, I think it goes without saying that, you know, we've always been a fairly lean organization, and we just added, nothing went away. We just added on producing live, producing, editing, you know, all of this, these live performances. So we do need to figure out, you know, what the structure looks like. Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Who owns it? And what are the inputs that will keep that going? And then there's the financial piece of, you know, we are in a hall that's nearly 100 years old. It does not have cameras. Like, it doesn't do anything other than, it's a concert hall, and it's a great one, but that's all it does. And so even to produce all of these operas that we've done, I mean, there always needs to be a great deal of imagination involved. So same with cameras. You know, we brought in cameras through a digital production company that we know through our local PBS station who's helped us. But, you know, we have to figure out what the longer term solution here is. But I think the biggest thing we are struggling with is quality. You know, how do we continue to bring the level of quality that people come to expect from the Cleveland Orchestra to this new stage? You know, we keep talking about, it's our 3rd stage. We have the Severance Hall, we have our outdoor venue at Blossom, and this truly is the 3rd one. And learning to think not like an orchestra, but like a production company. The product is not the thing that happens on the stage. The product is something else. So we can play one program in a week for a live audience, but we can completely repackage that, tell a completely different story, engage an audience in a very different way digitally. But it all has to meet this level, this very high level of quality. And it's finding that balance. And maybe I'm being a little bit obtuse, but when one thinks like a production company and not like an orchestra, it's really easy to think, well, we have 8 services in a week, and we can do a rehearsal, and we can film and rehearsal film, and then you can chop all of that up, and then you'll have a season of content, and that's that. That won't work here, and it won't work for our patrons. So it's finding that balance between not doing things the way that you've always done them, being efficient with time and with resources, and really thinking about that digital piece as another product. And so that's I think what we're working on wrapping our heads around here.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about earlier, not in this discussion, but as we were preparing, was this idea that you don't have to film like a full performance and then share that full performance digitally. Especially for a symphony orchestra, you have some flexibility to film programs that you're doing on stage anyway, but then the experimentation can come into how do I take what I've already have and repackage it in a new way that allows us to experiment, allows it to become more readily consumable to audiences. So exciting
Exactly.
to see where you go with that.
Or program in ways that simply don't work in the concert hall. I mean, I love chamber music and large pieces and small pieces and all of these ideas that I've always wanted to do in the concert hall, but you can't because you'll have a 20-minute stage change and it breaks the flow. And you can experiment. You can bring all of these things together. We did a show in January that was part of the Cleveland Orchestra in Severance Hall, and the other part was Mitsuko Uchida, who is truly a member of the orchestra. I mean, I think she's appeared with the orchestra every year for 25 years, but she lives in London, and she played this gorgeous Schubert sonata in Wigmore Hall, and we worked with them, and we licensed the performance from, for our exclusive use, but from them. And so you got to travel around the world and hear chamber music and orchestral music and all of these things because, again, I guess it's the technology imperative. What can it do? What can it bring us that a live concert experience can't?
And Martin, I know you spoke a little bit to the staffing perspective, but are there other learnings or questions really that you still have or you're still exploring when it comes to producing for the digital stage as well as in person?
Yeah, I think what's been great about this year is that our audience, they, first of all, they were happy just to have something, it's like we're at home, like, oh my gosh, you're going to do a play for me here? Thank you, right? I think it's true, though, that as time goes on, we'll be expected to, not that we haven't been doing it well, but the sort of like patience that people had, and we're like, oh, okay, we can wait till next week for captions to be ready, for instance, or what have you. People will at some point expect us to be still doing theater, but doing it at, the level of Netflix, right? And we super aren't Netflix, right? If anybody knows them, please, we're happy to talk to them. But it is important to stay focused on the scope of what we do. And I think understanding that at some point there was a tension between that, like how much do we want this to be like a film and how much do we want this to be like a filmed theater production. And we just went fully into we're still doing it on stage. There may not be people sitting out there, but this is a set. There are people on stage. They're doing costume changes. There's maybe actors playing multiple roles. That's part of what we do. We're capturing that experience in a slightly different way than you'd experience at the theater because you're seeing it from different angles. You're seeing it more close up than you might otherwise see it, but it is still a play that you're watching. So I think as long as we stay focused and on the fact that that is what we are doing and don't try to, move into filming a TV show or what have you, although we are doing a production of Designing Women this year, which was a TV show, but that confuses things. As long as we stay focused on that, we can do it well and at the level of quality that will meet our audience's expectation.
That's great. I love that takeaway of staying true to who you are. You're still producing live theater, and that's what you're going to deliver digitally as well. I'd like to start to shift gears to sort of wrapping up some final thoughts. And Angela, I'd love to come back to you because we've spent a lot of time talking about producing companies. And I know we have some artists that are tuning in today as well. And you know, there are a number of artists that this past year have experimented for the first time with creating content, but obviously you are not new to this. And I would love to just know what you would say to artists that have an idea and aren't really sure what the next step is. You know, they have an idea for a piece of content or a kind of show they would like to create, and they don't know how to get started.
Well, I would say, first of all, get all of your infrastructure together. Get your ring light, get your podcast mics, get your Yeti, make sure you have a good computer and upgrade your iPhone, because that iPhone, honey, is invaluable. And get you some tripods. When you're out in the street, you just, you know, you got content right there, you know, and it'll look good. Make sure that you stay on top of your game when it comes to being prepared to sing, and then just do it. If you have an idea, my mother always said, thoughts are things. And if you can think it, you can do it. Don't be afraid. I started opera from a Sistah's point of view in the back seat of my agent's Oldsmobile as I was going to New York City to audition or compete in the Birgit Nilsson competition. And I just had a yellow legal pad and I was just jotting down ideas. I always have, you have notes in your phone. I'm always jotting down ideas. I'm always thinking and churning. If you can think it and then let it have a flow, do it. Don't be afraid to get out there and show and do your personal best. And I want to piggyback on some of the other things that were said. I should have jumped in, but I didn't. I believe that walls create walls. This pandemic has been a blessing to this business in more ways than one. You have to think of the glass as half full instead of half empty, because now we do have all these other places that we can perform, and they want the content and they want to be there. So then later we can woo them back into the walls, but, you know, having a little give to them, you know, and that also has made the organization relax a bit, you know, because we have been seen as a little stuffy and, oh, I know they wouldn't want me there. But now we're saying come, and they are coming. Also, with opera from a Sistah's point of view, the thing that makes it plug and play, especially if it's recorded digitally, is that for those schools or organizations that can't afford to have me come, this is something that they can show to their schools. And it's also building up positive Black role models for these kids that probably wouldn't have ever seen a Black opera singer ever. So I say, if you have the idea, go for it. Don't be afraid. God bless you.
Thank you.
Coraggio.
Arthur, I'd love to ask you an adjacent question, which is, MOT has really experimented this year in a lot of ways. And we've seen all different aspects across the spectrum of people or organizations really putting themselves out there and being a little bit more hesitant. So what would you say maybe to an organization that's reluctant to really put themselves out there, and how would you encourage them to really just go for it?
Yeah, as I said, I think Angela and other people have mentioned, this time was devastating. This was a devastating year, not only because of the amazing loss and pain, but also things that have changed for a positive. I look at some of the efforts made after the murder of George Floyd, how his death has shown a light on some of the inequities in our business. And so you see a lot of wrongs being righted. And I think that is simply fantastic. This is the time, I think, to step out. I mean, when Yuval Sharon said we're going to do Gotterdammerung with the heaviest Wagner we'd ever done was Dutchman, and that was a stretch. That was a lot. And so the idea that this guy was going to come in and we're going to do Gotterdammerung, that's crazy. And a parking, that's crazy. Christine Gerke's going to come, that's nuts. So I think just being open, I think we have no choice. We have to step out and be outside of our comfort zone That's just what we're going to have to do. And you're just going to have to try. I mean, it doesn't mean go out and make, boneheaded decisions, or certainly think things out and consider them. But yeah, this is the time. You're going to have to go big or go home, I think.
Hey.
Well, in order to close us out today, I would like to close us out the same way that we started. I'm going to ask each of you to respond to the same question. And that is, this year, if nothing else, has changed our perspective on a lot of different things. So I would love to hear, just in a minute or so, a year from now, what does success look like for you within your organization or as an individual? And Mark, I'd love to come back to you to start.
This is a year, well, I don't need to belabor the point, right? The entire world changed. A year from now, I would consider it a success if the people of Cleveland felt that we were not the Cleveland Orchestra, but we were Cleveland's orchestra. And that we, as an institution, had found a way to, continue being a top flight global arts organization, while continuing to have this flexibility, continuing to remember that we need this space. We need this space to say, George Floyd has been murdered and we have to respond. We have to, and we can't respond 4 years from now when it makes sense in our planning. We need to have the flexibility in our schedule, in our lives, in our thoughts, in our artistic makeup to be present. Because this is what not only our local community, but the global community is now expecting. And it's the right thing to do. So, rooted in our local community, still one of the great orchestras, and artistically more open. That's what I would consider success.
Thank you. Beautiful. Angela, how about for you?
Well, I would like to see in the next year, as far as success is concerned, is that Morning Brown, my foundation, that is the umbrella foundation for opera from a Sistah's point of view, to be able to amass grants, to be able to continue this work. I would think that would be successful. Individual sponsors, and to have a tour of universities of opera from a Sistah's point of view, to spotlight emerging Black artists and to continue the good work we've already started. So yeah, I would see that as success.
Thank you. And Keith, Opera Birmingham, what does success look like for you a year from now?
I would hope that we've already embraced doing things differently this year. As we've all said, we've had to, that we will have continued that learning to really become Birmingham opera, that we will have continued down the journey that we've already started of doing works that reflect our community, both with the voices and people on the stage, as well as the stories we are telling. As Mark said, I think it is our responsibility to respond to what's happening in the larger world, as well as what's happening specifically here in Birmingham. And we now know we don't have to be afraid to, we don't have to do something big to make that statement. We can do things in the parks, we can do things online, we can do things in a variety of different ways, so that we will have continued down that path, embracing, not have gone back to where we were, but have moved forward from where we are now.
Great. And Martin for TheatreSquared.
Thank you. So many good points here. I mean, as Arthur is pointing out, I mean, for our company, we were doing all these crazy things. We're filming things for the first time. But really, the most important work we were doing was in asking ourselves, are we an agent of positive social change? Are we affecting the world and making it better? Are we perpetuating racialized privilege, in the way we price our tickets and who we advertise to and the shows we select, and the makeup of our staff or who's on our stage? if we are, where we are, how can we change that? So yeah, I think a year from now, we'd better be seeing the fruits of those conversations on our stage and in our audience and in our commons, and defining community as we always do by what we share, but looking at ourselves and our community and recognizing it in a whole new way. I think one of the interesting conversations that's been had so much over the last year is, who is essential, right? What a weird word. Like, what's it mean to be an essential business or an essential worker? And where are we as a theater company or as an opera company? And I hope that people are ending this year recognizing the void in their lives and recognizing participating this as something essential to their lives, and that a year from now they'll be feeling that so much more because of what we've brought back to them and what they were able to come back to, and we'll stop having conversations about arts as an amenity or something like the cherry on top, but rather as something we can't live without. So when it stops, it's just, in what way does it look different? Not when will it come back, So yeah, I hope that our audience sees us as essential, but all of our audiences see us that way. And that's probably going to be the result of the work we keep doing.
Absolutely. And Arthur.
I guess, it's funny, if I asked me this question about a year ago, I would have said, depending on how many tickets or how much money came in or revenue. And now it's not so much that. Today, I think I mentioned earlier, we had vaccinated the chorus and orchestra. The city came with extra doses yesterday and said, we can open up to the community. We have these extra doses will come. And so seeing people today being so appreciative, and now seeing the opera houses, not just that place where they do that funny music, but this is a part of our community. I think moving forward, if we can continue for our community to see us more than just a brick building that's real big and real pretty, but is a part of their community, a part of their lives, that's a big deal. I think when we talked about 50% of new patrons who who could come to Twilight Gods, if we do this right, we have, X and Opera Blue coming up. If we can really make great inroads into a community who have not felt invited in the past to be invited now, that will be success in a year.
Thank you so much. And thank you for indulging me in really putting these visions for our future out into the universe. I'm so excited to see all of the progress that we've made, not only over the course of this past year, but that we plan to make moving into the future. So thank you for being a part of today's discussion, and I will turn it over to Mark to close us out.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank everyone on this panel. I've been making a point recently, and I share it here, that if we think about how much taxpayer money has come to our organizations through PPP-1 loans, PPP-2 loans, through, we hope, the SVOG funds that we apply for tomorrow, it's starting sometime at midday. We have had hundreds of thousands, in some institutions, millions of dollars of taxpayer money come into our organizations. And with that, I think, comes a responsibility that money has not flowed to us in order to make the opera bubble a more comfortable bubble for opera lovers. That money has come to us to lift our organizations up and sustain them so they can be part of the healing that our nation and our communities need. So I want to remind everyone that as we are looking at our balance sheets and thinking, wow, we did okay this year, that money from the public coffers comes with public responsibility. And if we hope to maintain that level or some higher level of support for the arts, we need to demonstrate that if you give to us, we will give back. So all of this creative thinking isn't just about our artistic expression, it's also about our public, our moral responsibility with the support that we've had in this last year. I want to thank everybody for your great comments, for the fantastic work you're doing. You, as some questions piled up, you were answering them as you went. So Lisa, so well moderated. Thank you very, very much for that. And to all of you for being a part of the Opera America family. I am supposed to deliver an advertisement for our upcoming annual conference, which takes place in May. It starts on May 10th and it goes on several days each week through May 27, treating really important how I got muted. So please feel free to participate in our conference. As you see, the dates are available. Registration is currently open. Folks, spring is here. Vaccinations are spreading around the country. Let's be cautious. Let's be optimistic. Let's be determined to do really well for our communities and for our nation. Thanks so much for being with us today. Look forward to seeing you soon.